we talked last week about the 3-year blueprint and the architecture and putting it together. And now we're going to talk about how we integrate everything we've learned. So across the 12 different topics, every single one has had an exercise. Any single one of those can justify enough work for 13 weeks as it is, because we're talking about things like habit change. We're talking about how we see ourselves. We're talking about how we shape the way in which we live our lives and invest our energy. So this week, we're going to talk about, as the closeout, how we integrate this on an ongoing basis and how we then implement a quarterly review, which we did touch on last week. But this is really thinking about how do we bring all of that together and how do we do a regular practice to make sure that we're staying true to the intentions that we've set over the course of the last 13 weeks. The reason it matters that we keep coming back to this is that patterns don't lie. So we're incredibly good at lying to ourselves and finding reasons for doing things. We make decisions with our emotions and then we justify them with logic. But if we're shown the data, so if we come back and revisit some of these exercises on a regular basis, then we can see what's really shifting and what really isn't. And if something isn't really shifting, that's absolutely fine, but that's telling us something about our underlying motivation and whether this is really a priority for us or not. So by coming back to this every quarter, we can identify patterns of what's changing, what's not, and see what's working and maybe what needs to be tweaked. As always, we're going to favor action over insight. So everything is about setting small goals. Everything is about setting achievable goals so that we can get that forward momentum. And in this exercise, we talk about just having 3 commitments. So no more than that, very similar to the 3 to 5 items that we can hold in our heads at any one time. More than 3 commitments and actions is going to be far too much for us to actually feasibly do. And I think any of us who've set 10 New Year's resolutions can attest to this. And then finally, the reason why this has such a massive impact on your teams, and this is why I tend to coach fairly senior people as opposed to less senior people, is the impact this has on your team ripples out just indescribably. Like when people start to see change in behaviors at the top, and it's much more about the walk that we're walking, not the talk that we're talking, then the impact of this is just phenomenal across different teams. So being able to integrate this is not a selfish action. This is something that is going to benefit your whole team, your whole organization, the people around you as well. The first piece, pattern recognition. So we've done a whole quarter. I'm not sure how we're at the end of March, but we are. And identifying what's really driving or draining you across these domains is critical. We've talked about energy. We did that in the first couple of weeks. So what's draining you in that? Where are your energy vampires and where are your energizers? And what are your weekly rhythms? So we've got a couple of people who've been under the weather for a part of that, which obviously is going to have an impact on that. But generally, we can start to see the patterns on our weekly rhythms. We talked about building better careers and identifying then the recurring themes and frictions. So who are the kind of people when it comes to, for example, our values, which I realize we covered under lives, but it can really impact our careers. Where are we seeing friction? Where are we hitting ceilings that we don't think should be there? What are the key levers, such as things like sponsorship or executive presence, which we discussed, that are going to help people really get ahead in their careers? And then on the life piece, which I know Duncan called me out last week and said maybe we should have done this right at the beginning, but this is the real integration piece where you start to talk about values, what really matters to us, and then how we weave that into how we invest our energy across our time. And the final piece is we're going to look and see if we can find a universal pattern. So what is the thread that is running across building better bodies, building better careers, building better lives? And that might be your motivation. That might be one of the challenges that you keep facing. Very often it's the voice in our head telling us something. You are this kind of person, or this is the thing that you always do, whatever it may be. But we'll very often find a common narrative and a common thread across all 3 of the build better bodies, careers, and lives that is holding us back, or that can be leveraged to really help us progress in the areas that we want to focus on. Finding or looking for these key themes or patterns is not as hard or it's not as critical an exercise as it might appear. It's not going to take a ton of time, but it might uncover some things that require further thought. The very first question on Build Better Bodies is what over the last quarter has your body been telling you? So what have your energy levels been like? What health signals have you had? Have you gotten sick? Have you found that you've had more energy when you start to think about different facets of your life? What physical messages, and our physiology is absolutely critical here, what physical messages have you been receiving over the last quarter? Then we look at the career and what has your career told you? So what opportunities have come up? What challenges have come up? And then what are you starting to see in terms of patterns and direction of where you want to go? And that's not just because you've been on this masterclass series, and many of you have been here from day one, but it's also just when we're doing the quarterly reflection exercise of what's happening, what's the pattern, what's the trajectory. Because if it's stalling, particularly in the career area, then we probably have a challenge on our hands. We want to see that forward momentum so that you can continue to feel that you are growing. The third one is, what did my life tell me? So how are my relationships at home? How is my personal satisfaction and my personal growth as well? So are things all good on that front or not? And it's very difficult to have all three of these firing on all cylinders at all times, which is why it's good to have that quarterly check-in, as opposed to wait for that to blow up in one of these spaces after more than a few months. And then finally, for this universal thread, what is the thing that I am avoiding most? So what decisions am I postponing? What am I putting off? Where am I procrastinating? That's very often where the friction is, because often that's the lever that we need to pull to get the breakthrough in one or more of the other areas as well. So what's the thing that we're really putting off? What's the story that we're telling ourselves? And as you'll see here in the exercise, I've also put these very specific times and dates rather than sort of be vague, because it's really easy to tell ourselves, like, this is what happened, or this is why, or this is the kind of person I am. But if we start to get really specific and go down into the data, we can identify things like triggers, we can identify real patterns around how we're behaving. And on the basis of those findings, we then form our strategic action plan for the next quarter. So we will just make those three commitments. One will be around energy. So what are we going to do that is measurable and concrete to boost our energy, take care of our well-being, make sure that we're showing up the very best version of ourselves that we can? And often that might be about protecting our energy. So it may well involve some boundaries. One, career decision. So what is something that you want to aim for that feels slightly uncomfortable? And if it doesn't get you a little bit in your gut, it might not be big enough, but it needs to have a deadline and be achievable within a quarter. And then finally, we've spent quite a lot of time now on values and how we integrate those. What's one commitment within your life about how you can integrate those values and your well-being into how you're living your life now? And again, that may well involve some boundaries, which can be fairly tough work. Finally, because we're doing this on a quarterly basis, and as I said, it needs to be something we can track so that it's achievable, I would really highly recommend you use leading rather than lagging indicators. So you can measure your input into something. I'll use well-being as an example. I might say I want to get into really good shape and give myself a very specific weight target or muscle density target if I'm doing a DEX or something else. But that's the output, that's the lagging metric. What I can measure is how often am I working out, or what kind of foods am I eating. What I can measure is how I'm actually taking care of those habits to make sure that I'm working towards that outcome rather than the outcome itself being the indicator that I'm tracking. So the behaviors, for example, in that case, me going to the gym or me doing my weights or me doing my body weight and my push-ups in the morning, whatever it may be, the behaviors are something I can measure and I can know that I'm doing on the days I'm supposed to be doing. And then the final piece from me, the integration journey, I've actually just mapped out specifically what you might want to do. And this is possibly more for the people who are watching this on the recording, because we do have about 15 people who watch this and then do the exercise afterwards. Think about in the next couple of weeks what those commitments are. So just three of them, launch them, expect to fail, expect friction, expect pushback, particularly if you've got boundaries. And then think about, how am I going to course correct and make sure that I stick with those commitments? So then you're going to schedule a check-in with yourself in 2 weeks' time and see where you are, see what needs to change, see what needs to pivot, and how you need support in order to achieve those commitments. Weeks 4 to 6, you're looking at a mid-quarter check-in. So celebrate the wins. As I said earlier, it's really important that we look back on the little things that we achieve, because it builds a sense of self-efficacy. And that's a neural pathway we really want to thicken until it's like a highway. That tells us we're the kind of people that make commitments to ourselves and we achieve. So celebrate the tiniest wins and address any of the obstacles that you're coming across early. So the reality is something will come up. You will fall off the wagon. You will forget to do your push-ups. But it's how you get back on and how you cycle around that relapse as quickly as possible. Once you get to weeks 10 to 12, gather all of your quarter 3 materials. So you're going to do this exercise again. Note what's working. What commitments did I make? How did I do? What commitments do I want to make for the next quarter as well? And then again, complete this workbook. This is a quarterly exercise. It's something we can do on the regular. And the whole point is it keeps us honest to ourselves, but it also means that we can track our progress. And the more we're tracking our progress, the more momentum we will build, because the more self-efficacy we will build. So with that, my final point on this would be to actually sit down and schedule these reviews into your diary, because if we don't, they never happen. I would schedule in a good half an hour for each one of them. And then I'm now switching this off because I really like to talk about people's reflections on what we've covered in the last 13 weeks. And I really, really want to hear your wins.